What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the top plays for Thursday, August 17th game between the Cleveland Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles. First game of the second week of the NFL preseason. Happy to be here bringing you our top plays. We will have a daily plug posted at occupyfantasy.com going over the top plays for not just this slate, but every single slate of preseason week 2. So you certainly want to make sure that you're subscribed to make sure you don't miss out on all of our top plays. Why don't you want to miss out on them? Well, I'm sorry to say that I came close last week to having a really, really good day. But unfortunately, I was bested by this owner known as Court Jesters. The rest of you that have been with us for a while affectionately know of him as Brian Jester. Brian was able to take down the Sunday two-game main slate on DraftKings with this lineup here, with our top play at running back, Sincere McCormick, scoring 2 touchdowns for the Las Vegas Raiders. We had identified via trends that Josh McDaniels and the Raiders offense tend to lean on their last running back on the depth chart in the second half of preseason week 1 pretty heavily. And obviously, a little bit of good luck came alongside that. Brian was able to get McCormick in a really high upside lineup here with the rest of our top plays from preseason week 1 on Sunday. One of our high upside, high risk quarterbacks. Brian had not just Sincere McCormick at running back, but he also had Ellis Merriweather, another high upside running back from the Saints that we thought was a good play on that slate in his winning lineup. And then the top 3 wide receivers that we thought everybody should play, Rashee Rice, Justin Ross, A.T. Perry, all having extremely good preseason week 1 games, led to good results for any combination of our top plays here at the different positions. So congratulations, not just to Brian, but to all of our members who actually had a really, really strong day on Sunday in preseason. They're pretty happy in the Discord. Let's try and keep the ball rolling here on Thursday evening. Try to give you some of the top plays here tonight. And I will also give you a low-owned play that we don't think the field will be on at the end of the video to try to keep that tradition rolling here into the second week of the preseason. Okay, here in preseason, it is week 2. We have a little bit more efficiency out of offenses in these games, especially in the single game environment. But the defenses and the kickers are still very high upside plays. So this game's a 38.5 point total. Eagles favored by 3.5 points. So each of the Eagles defense and even as underdogs, the Browns defense have an opportunity to have a really high floor on this slate. But if we expect scoring to be a little higher, they can be a little scary. So that's why we actually think with Cleveland and Philadelphia especially, these are both offenses with just one kicker that will be taking the field goal and extra point reps on the field. Cade York with the Browns and Jake Elliott with the Eagles, probably somewhat safer for median outcome in this game, with it having a little bit of a higher total for a preseason game anyway. So specialists, defenses, kickers, still great plays here in the second week of the preseason. Not as strong as first week in preseason, but strong nonetheless. We have 3 quarterbacks that are going to play a half in this game. The Cleveland Browns told us that Watson is not going to play. So we know that Deshaun Watson is out this week. The Browns and the Eagles had competitive joint practices all week, so they had a good chance to look at their veteran units on offense and defense against each other. This is a very common thing in the modern NFL. A lot of teams around the league doing this before their preseason games. Starters do not play as much in the preseason as they used to. Starters for the Browns will not be playing at all tonight. So Deshaun Watson, he's out, and his primary backup, Joshua Dobbs, has been ruled out as well. So if you watched the Hall of Fame game a couple of weeks ago in Canton against the Jets, you saw a lot of Kellen Mond in the first half of that game. Kellen Mond will actually be getting the second half tonight for the Browns against the Eagles. Dorian Thompson-Robinson out of UCLA, Browns draft pick this past spring, will get the start tonight. Kevin Stefanski flat out said that to us in some of his media availability here during joint practices. So each of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Kellen Mond, going to get a half of football, high upside plays. We prefer Thompson-Robinson of the 2. He's looked pretty good so far this preseason. Now, there are 3 quarterbacks on the Philadelphia side that could play in this game. We're not expecting Jalen Hurts. We think he's going to be out once again. Marcus Mariota played the entire first half last week based off of the trends research that we have done on Nick Sirianni and the Eagles coaching staff. The second quarterback on the depth chart, which is Marcus Mariota, also played a full half of football in preseason week 2 last year. So we're expecting the same thing tonight. So Mariota is the third high upside quarterback on this slate. Do think people are going to look at the fact that Cleveland has 2 guys playing and the Eagles have 3 guys playing, and Mariota is going to be the quarterback that goes lower owned. So he's probably a pretty good tournament play here with equal playing time upside to Mond and Thompson Robinson, and the Eagles being on the favored side of projections in this game as well. The Eagles have Ian Book and Tanner McKee behind him to split the rest of the reps in the second half. We think those guys will get about a quarter each. But so at the quarterback position, you have Mariota's playable, and you have Thompson Robinson and Mond from the Browns as well at quarterback that are available as plays in this game. Now, much has been made about the Eagles' usage at the running back position in the first week of the preseason. Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott did not play preseason week 1. DeAndre Swift started, played about 6 snaps, and then he was done for the day. And Rashad Penny played virtually the entire first half for the Eagles. So this has caused a lot of discussion who's actually going to be the starting running back this season. Nick Sirianni tried to dispel that a little bit and come out in the media and tell us that he likes to get these guys tackled. That's just his mentality. He likes to get the running backs out there so they're not the first time they're tackled is not in the regular season. So he got that out of the way with Penny and with Swift. He's told us that Gainwell and Scott are going to play in week 2 here. And then we've also got Trey Sermon, who scored the touchdown last week, had a lot of snaps, I believe led the Eagles running backs in snaps last week, and Kennedy Brooks at the very back end of the roster that are all going to play. So bottom line, Eagles running back pretty messy. So if you want to play running backs on this slate, the top plays are actually on the Cleveland side because playing time is a lot more clear there. We know Nick Chubb is out. We know Jerome Ford is still not practicing, so he's not available. Leaves us just 3 running backs to play. Demetric Felton has played over 50% of snaps on average in both games that the Browns have had this preseason because they had the benefit of the Hall of Fame game. Demetric Felton with 15 carries and 3 targets in the 2 preseason games. And while he's playing less snaps, John Kelly Jr. has 16 carries and 6 targets for the 2 games. So each of Felton and John Kelly, very, very strong picks. And then your tournament pick at running back would be Hassan Hall, who's the last guy on the depth chart for the Browns, will be playing at the end of the game. He has half the carries of Felton and Kelly through 2 games of preseason and just 1 target in those 2 games. So not as many people are going to be playing him. He'll be the lower owned one here. But Felton and Ford, just from a playing time perspective, will continue to get a lot of touches here. The Browns did sign Jordan Wilkins, formerly of the Indianapolis Colts, but don't think he will have much of a role in this game because he signed fairly late in the week. So recap to this point, we have specialists, which would be the defenses and kickers. We have 3 quarterbacks expected to see a half, and we've got the 2 top running backs from the Browns and Kelly and Felton as decent plays on this slate. I think right there is a decent core for you to consider. So you could take some of my favorite plays I've talked about there to build out a lineup. And we've got Elliott from the Eagles, Thompson Robinson from the Browns, Demetric Felton at running back. I love the Browns wide receivers. Wide receivers are going to be my final 2 positions, top wide receivers from each side that we think are going to have a ton of playing time. A little bit of a preview of our stats that you will have in the plug this afternoon. Cedric Tillman, Austin Watkins, and David Bell led the Cleveland Browns in snaps last week. They were also amongst the leaders in the Hall of Fame game, but more importantly, they saw a ton of their action with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who is starting the game. So those 3 guys for the Browns at wide receiver, starting with Austin Watkins, are my favorite plays. Thanks to the folks over at ProFootballFocus.com, we have a little bit of insight into the usage at wide receiver for every single team this preseason. With Cleveland, looking at last week's game alone, Watkins ran 32 routes. Over 90% of those routes were lined up out wide, and he had a very high 14.3 yard average depth of target. So the quarterbacks on the Browns are looking for Watkins deep downfield, already has 1 touchdown this preseason, will be looking to add to that total tonight against the Eagles. David Bell is going to be running mostly slot routes. He has, last week he ran over 75% of his routes out of slot positions, but has a decent average to target at 11 yards. Just 1 game, so we'll see if that moves around a little bit. We can already kind of tell based off of slot versus wide snap distributions. Bell's going to be the slot wide receiver when Cleveland is in 3 wide receiver sets especially. Watkins will be on the outside, and Cedric Tillman, their rookie draft pick from this past April, will be the other boundary field stretching wide receiver for the majority of this game, based off of not just what's happened the last 2 weeks, but trends from Kevin Stefanski and the Browns offense. Since they have been the staff there in Cleveland, they tend to keep these guys playing a ton of snaps at wide receiver in the preseason. They continue to play a ton of snaps as the preseason closes. So Tillman, Watkins, and David Bell, very, very strong options here in preseason week 2 for the Cleveland Browns. Once again, was very good to me on our preview video last 2 weeks ago at this point. Austin Watkins Jr., my favorite of that group. On the Eagles side at wide receiver, if you paid attention to Eagles football last week, you probably know exactly who this guy is. Tyree Cleveland, previously of the Denver Broncos, depth piece there, now trying to earn a spot on the Eagles roster. And not just earn a spot, he earned a ton of targets in preseason week 1 for the Eagles, 10 of them, in fact. So most of his snaps, roughly 75% of them lined up out wide, but running a little bit in the slot. The Eagles tend to move their wide receivers around. Cleveland a little bit more dynamic, led them in routes run, led them in targets, had a decent ADOT of 11.5 yards as well. So Tyree Cleveland, we're expecting him to play a ton of snaps again. Cleveland's usage with Philadelphia is a little less certain than the Cleveland wide receivers usage, so that's confusing, huh? But we do like Tyree Cleveland once again tonight. But the other Philadelphia Eagle wide receiver that we feel pretty good about that you can consider on this slate, he played 80% of snaps. Tyree Cleveland played 85% of snaps last week. It was Joseph Ngata. Ngata had 4 targets last week, 58 air yards. The only concern here would be he wasn't targeted super heavily on a target per route run basis because some other guys on the team, like veteran Greg Ward, had 5 targets. He played significantly less snaps. Hazelwood here also played significantly less snaps, saw the same number of targets as Ngata. So these are other guys that could mix in, but I think Hazelwood and Ward a little lower upside than Ngata and Tyree Cleveland on this slate. So let's recap what we think is important going into tonight's game. Again, keep an eye out for the daily plug that we post this afternoon. That'll have updated information based off of any last-minute reporting we get, so some things may shift around. We have some really high upside with the specialists because we have one kicker on both sides in a relatively high total game for a preseason. I'm going to slot in Jake Elliott representing that group. I like the Browns defense as an underdog in tournaments this week. We have Dorian Thompson-Robinson as my favorite quarterback on the board, but there are actually 3 of them that are going to play. It's going to be Thompson-Robinson, Kellen Mond, and Marcus Mariota of the Eagles that are all going to have a half of football tonight. So you can use any of those 3 guys and feel very good about their floor production that you're going to get out of them. The running backs specifically on the Cleveland Browns side have the highest playing time and touch expectation. So I would prefer to play a Browns running back in the majority of my lineups this evening. I think the best one is Demetric Felton. And then at wide receiver with Cleveland, 3 guys are going to play a ton of snaps. It's going to be Austin Watkins. It's going to be Cedric Tillman. Those guys are going to play on the outside. It's going to be David Bell in the slot. And then on the Philadelphia side, Cleveland is the best wide receiver. Again, confusing. And Joseph Ngata would be my other favorite play at receiver for the Eagles. The last thing, you're looking for a low-owned play. People aren't necessarily going to roster very heavily. Maybe this will be a little more popular than I'm giving it credit for, but there is another position group that we tend to forget about. And they haven't performed well in preseason showdown slates typically, but the tight ends do exist. They are people too. We do have to talk about them occasionally. The Browns have been targeting their tight ends extremely heavily in the preseason, and there are 3 of them that we can consider tonight. I think the best one is going to be Thomas Greene, because Greene played the most snaps last week by a slight margin, 38% to Mitchell Payton's 32%. Greene ran slightly more routes than Mitchell Payton at tight end as well, so I think there may be a little bit more of high floor here with Thomas Greene, but your low-owned play is going to be a Cleveland tight end. Thomas Greene is my pick. Other one you can consider here is Zaire Mitchell Payton, hedging a little bit for you as we round out the video here, talking about the Browns and the Eagles on Thursday Night Football here in week 2 of the NFL preseason. Good luck tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with some talk about the 2-game slate on Friday evening.